You know, in a London museum, you can find the actual skull of a cow. Her name was Blossom. And you might wonder, why keep a cow's skull in a museum? Well, it's because she was a key player in the creation of the very first vaccine for smallpox. See, a scientist named Edward Jenner noticed something fascinating. Milkmaids who got a mild disease called cowpox from cows like Blossom, well, they never seemed to catch the deadly human version, smallpox. His incredible insight, all thanks to this one cow, ended up saving millions of lives.
It sounds a little weird, right? I mean, a cow helping with medicine, with biology, that makes sense. But political science? How does that work? Well, it turns out that a different cow, actually it was an ox, played a surprising part in one of the most powerful and unexpected arguments for democracy ever made.
To get how this happened, we first need to meet a guy named Sir Francis Galton. Now, he was a brilliant, very well-to-do scientist from the Victorian era. He was even Charles Darwin's cousin. But Galton was also a serious elitist. He absolutely hated the idea of democracy. He believed that leaving big, important decisions to the uneducated, common masses was just a recipe for disaster, and he actually set out to prove it with science.
So his big chance came at a local livestock fair. There was this contest, and it was pretty simple. Guess the weight of this big ox. Galton saw his opening. He got a hold of all 787 of the ticket stubs. Now, some of these guesses were from experts, butchers and farmers, but most of them were from regular folks who probably couldn't tell one end of a cow from the other. His plan was simple: collect the data, run the numbers, and prove, with cold hard facts, just how dumb the crowd really was.
After the contest was over, the ox was butchered and officially weighed, and the actual precise weight turned out to be 543.7 kilograms. This was it, the objective truth, the number Galton was going to use as a benchmark to prove the crowd's total failure.
So what did Galton find when he started crunching the numbers? Well, at first, it seemed like he was totally right. The individual guesses were all over the place. I mean, some were wildly high, others were just ridiculously low. It seemed like pure chaos, confirming all his biases. But then he did something that would completely change his mind. He decided to calculate the average of all the guesses.
And this part is just astonishing. The collective guess of that diverse crowd was 543.3 kilograms. They were off by only 400 grams, less than a pound. This collective average wasn't just incredibly accurate, it was more accurate than any single guess from any of the so-called experts at the fair. All the individual mistakes, the high ones and the low ones, had somehow perfectly canceled each other out.
Galton was so floored by this that he published his findings in the world-famous science journal Nature. This guy, the great anti-democrat, had to admit that the voice of the people was, as he wrote it, essentially correct. An individual person might be foolish, but the collective can be an absolute genius.
Okay, but hang on a second. This brings up a huge question, right? If crowds are so incredibly wise, then why is human history just littered with examples of entire societies going completely mad? Majorities choosing paths that lead to absolute disaster and horror. Is the crowd really always this wise?
The answer comes down to understanding that there are two totally different kinds of error. What Galton's crowd had was noise, random mistakes scattered in every direction. Some guessed high, some guessed low, and it all balanced out in the end. Democracy is actually great at filtering out that kind of noise. But it's incredibly vulnerable to something far more dangerous: bias. That's a systematic error, where everyone starts making the same mistake, pulling the average in the same wrong direction. And that's when collective wisdom turns into collective madness. And for a truly devastating modern example of this, we have to look at Myanmar and the story of Aung San Suu Kyi. I mean, here was a woman who was celebrated around the world as a hero of democracy, a Nobel Peace Prize winner. But what happened next is a terrifying look at how a whole nation's judgment can be systematically poisoned.
So here's the story. After decades of military dictatorship, Myanmar started to open up. In 2012, Facebook was unblocked, and it basically became the entire internet for millions of people. But very quickly, it turned into a sewer of hate speech, all targeting the Rohingya, a Muslim minority group. Disinformation went viral, convincing the Buddhist majority that the Rohingya were some kind of existential threat. This all boiled over into a horrific campaign of ethnic cleansing by the military and civilian mobs. And the most shocking part of all, Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel laureate, went to the International Court of Justice and publicly defended the military's actions.
This horrible bias was fueled by constant viral messages just like this one. This wasn't random noise. This was a systematic campaign to dehumanize an entire group of people. Later on, investigations found that thousands of fake accounts, actually run by the Myanmar military, were being used to stoke this hatred. The collective judgment of a whole country was deliberately corrupted.
And this vulnerability we have to social influence, it's not just a theory, it's been proven in labs. A study in Zurich, back in 2011, basically updated Galton's experiment. In the first round, people guessed things independently, and just like with the ox, their collective average was extremely accurate. But then, for the second round, they were allowed to see what other people were guessing. The result? Their group's accuracy just plummeted. The average guess got way worse, because people started abandoning their own judgment to go along with what they thought the group believed.
So, if collective bias can lead an entire nation into madness, how can it ever be corrected? How does a society pull itself back from that brink? Well, for a powerful answer, let's look at a country that was staring right into that same abyss but chose a radically different path: post-apartheid South Africa.
When the racist apartheid regime finally fell in 1994, the black majority, who had been brutally oppressed for decades, was finally in power. The most natural path, the one that seemed the most just, was revenge. The majority was demanding prosecutions and punishment. But leaders like Nelson Mandela looked at that path and saw a terrifying future: civil war, economic collapse, a never-ending cycle of violence. They had to make an impossible choice between the majority's thirst for vengeance and a completely uncertain path toward reconciliation.
Their solution was something the world had never really seen before: the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC. The idea was simple but profound. Perpetrators of violence during apartheid could receive amnesty. They could avoid prison, but only if they came forward and told the entire truth about their crimes, publicly, often face-to-face with their victims. And the entire nation listened to these raw, painful hearings live on the radio.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who chaired the commission, really captured its philosophy perfectly. The goal wasn't to forget the past, or even to punish it. It was to understand it. The commission's whole idea was that truth is the road to reconciliation. First, you have to lay the truth bare, no matter how ugly it is, before a nation can even start to heal and become whole again.
And this was all guided by Nelson Mandela's incredible understanding of human nature. He knew that if the new South Africa was built on a foundation of revenge, the country would stay imprisoned by its own past. Forgiveness, as impossibly difficult as it was the only way to find true freedom for everyone.
So what's the big lesson here? We've seen a crowd that was wise, a crowd that went mad, and a crowd that was carefully guided away from madness. This brings us right to the heart of the political system that was designed to handle this exact contradiction.
You see, that wisdom of the crowds phenomenon, it only really works if you have three critical things. First, you need a diversity of opinions. Second, people have to make their judgments independently, without being influenced by others. And third, you need a fair, neutral way to add up all those opinions.
And that right there, that second condition, independence, that's the whole problem, isn't it? Because in the real world, we're almost never truly independent. We're social creatures. We conform to our groups. We're swayed by charismatic leaders, and our opinions get shaped by the information bubbles we live in online. We are constantly being biased. And this is precisely where the idea of a liberal democracy becomes so crucial. It's so much more than just majority rule. It's a system of institutions, of guardrails that are specifically designed to protect a society from the dangers of its own collective bias. It protects minorities from the tyranny of the majority, it ensures that courts are independent and can't be swayed by popular opinion, and it defends a free press that can challenge the dominant narrative.
So, to be really clear, a liberal democracy embraces the wisdom of the crowd through elections. That's the democracy part. But it also builds a fortress of institutions around it. The rule of law, individual rights, separation of powers. That's the liberal part. It's a system that's designed to get the very best out of the crowd while protecting all of us from its absolute worst.
In the end, that story that started with the simple cow weighing contest tells us something incredibly profound. It tells us that real democracy isn't just about letting the majority decide whatever it wants. It's about having a system of guardrails that are strong enough to save the majority from itself. Which, of course, leaves us all with a pretty critical question for our own time. In this age of social media and intense polarization, are those guardrails still strong enough?